Hi, this is the Apologist Bookshelf. Thank you for being part of it. Gary Zacharias here. There's a book called The Christian Mind by Harry Blamires, and it's probably, if I think about it, it's probably the oldest book that I still have on my shelf. It came out something like 63 years ago, and you think, well, what use is this? And yet I find what he is talking about so up to date, because he's basically talking about how Christianity doesn't do very well in this modern secular world. In fact, it's surrendered to secularism. That's one of his chapters. And he talks about how important it is to think Christianly and to think secularly, look at the two, and the value of thinking Christianly. The reason why I find this so powerful is that I've done a talk on worldviews, and my thought is we have compartmentalized as Christians what it means to think Christianly, to think about God and his relationship to this world and his relationship to our lives. We compartmentalize it. Sunday, we think Christianly. We sing songs that have theological importance. We hear maybe a message from a pastor, and we think about how something in the New Testament or the Old Testament applies to our lives. We talk to friends. How's it going? Can I pray for you? We think about using our money for God's work. And so that's great. But the problem is Monday rolls around. Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, and all of a sudden we put our Christian thoughts aside, and now we become pretty secular. We talk about our free time, we talk about sports, we talk about weather, we think about our relationship with our spouse, politics, whatever it is, and we're looking at it actually in kind of a secular perspective. We don't use Christian thoughts when we come to the 6 other days of the week. And that's what this author is doing. It's how should a Christian think? And so he's got a first section that talks about how to think Christianly. What does that mean? And then he's got part 2, and that's what I would like to look at today. I've done a previous podcast for his first chapter in the first part 1 of the book called A Surrender to Secularism. I want to go to part 2, and it's got 6 sections. And this is called The Marks of the Christian Mind. So how do we think differently than our neighbors, the people we work with who aren't Christians? Well, one is supernatural orientation that we have. Number 2, awareness of evil. Number 3, a conception of truth. Number 4, an acceptance of authority. Number 5, it's concern for the person. And then number 6, it's sacramental cast. So I'd like to do in order over the next few podcasts when I come back to this book. But today at least, let's take a look at that first item. It's supernatural orientation. And I think what struck me about this, the importance of this, is I've been reading a lot on artificial intelligence. And over again, what I'm hearing is that we have lost our sense of the transcendent, something that's beyond this life, something more than what we can put under a microscope. That's called scientific naturalism. Just the reality is just this world, whatever you can see and test. And that's limited us. And so we fear death. We want to make life easy, and we turn to artificial intelligence, or we entertain ourselves, or whatever it takes to focus on this world and not think about another world out there. Now, Christianity says there is another world. There's the supernatural world. So that's where the author is going. So here we go. Here's chapter 1 in this second section. He said, the prime mark of a Christian mind is that it cultivates an eternal perspective. It looks beyond this life to some other life. Or we could say it's supernaturally orientated, he says, and brings to bear upon our earth, considerations about this earth, the fact of heaven and the fact of hell, which is not pleasant, is it? He says the religious view of life is so different from the secular view of life. He says it's a wonder that the Christian can communicate with the modern secularist. He says that's our problem today. He says it's really hard to talk to them about our human situation. So he says the Christian mind sees human life and human history being held in the hands of God. It's God who sustains the entire universe by his power and his love. And the whole natural order around us is dependent upon the supernatural order. So this life, these 70, 80, 90 years, whatever we get, we would say as Christians are inconclusive. It's just preparing us for another. This world is not my home. I'm just a passing through. That's an old song. But that's what he's talking about here. This world is just a temporary place of refuge. It's not our true and final home. But he said, if you look around, what's the secular view? It ignores the reality beyond this world. Secularism is rooted in this world. It puts its trust in this life. And so if this is all we have, what's the point of living? Happiness and well-being. That's our primary concern. So it presupposes that that which we experience directly with the senses is it. That's it. The heart and the totality of everything is just what we experience with our senses. That's that scientific naturalism approach. So we've got a huge collision there, because the teaching of Christian revelation says that the supernatural world broke in to our world. That's the whole doctrine of the incarnation, isn't it? God's love and power. He didn't just watch, he actually intervened. As the author says, the greater breaks in upon the smaller. Yeah. But secularism is rooted in this world. It doesn't allow for any other world. So whenever secularism encounters the Christian mind, then what can happen? Secularism can seduce Christians to overlook the supernatural and just focus on this life. And that's what I was talking about at the start of this podcast. Monday through Saturday, the secular world is so powerful and so strong, and it's all around us. It's what we listen to, it's what we watch, that it can make us overlook the supernatural. It's hard for us to get out of a frame of reference to actually reach out to the supernatural. And I think he's right. He says, think about this. A Christian is working side by side with a secularist. Now, the Christian prays at home, but every day he doesn't really talk Christianly because he's talking to secularists. So all that stays at home. So he's compartmentalized again. So the author here says his mind ceases to think Christianly. In fact, he claims that we're actually training our mind and forcing our mind to think secularly, so we can get along with the people real well and get our jobs done efficiently. So we start losing the habit of thinking Christianly when we're talking about practical affairs in which we're actively involved in. So what are some of the practical affairs? Things like politics and home life and work and things like that. So he said, the modern Christian becomes, he says, schizophrenic in a way, hopping in and out of his Christian mentality when the conversation changes from what's going on in the world or the Bible or some kind of action or politics or advertising or the environment. So it said that's almost like schizophrenia. So he says the Christian layman saying to himself, well, it's no good talking about the kingdom of heaven or eternal salvation to my coworkers. It's vital to the work in question. So for me, it's important privately, but here it's going to be meaningless. There's a job that we all have to do. So I'll forget about that for the time being. He said it's understandable that we would do that. So we get quiet when we're on the job. Yeah. So he says you don't need any argument to prove that the supernaturally oriented view of the human situation, according to the Christian, is remote. When you look at secular culture, now what is he talking about? Where do we see that? He says magazines, movies, the press, television. He says, ask yourself, what kind of world is pictured there? Is it the Christian worldview? Is it anything to do with the supernatural? A world that's packed full of sinners, depending the mercy of God? A world that has powerless creatures running around thinking they can go without God and making a big mess of things as a result? And the answer, of course, is no. When I watch TV or I'm looking at a movie, I think about how rare it is to find a Christian. And if you do, they're probably the villain of the story. It's hard to find somebody who's upright and doing something because of a fear of God. Yeah, we don't see that. He said the secular mind presents its popular thinking to the world as self-sufficient. So everything's under control. They say, yeah, we've got some difficulties, but we're doing pretty well. We've got our rising standard of living. We've got science. We have an organized civilization. We're doing more for the poor. And the Christian looks at this stuff and says, really? Things are in a good shape? I don't think so. So is there real progress? The more things we get, is that what's going to make us comfortable, make us happy, make us good people? And of course, the Christian view is no. So he says the Christian mind is bewildered when it looks around because it can't figure out how to communicate meaningfully with a secular mind that's so different. It's completely different as far as this one view of what life is all about. What is reality? There's the key question, huh? What's reality? Is there something beyond what we can see and touch? So he said, of all the marks of a Christian mind, this supernatural orientation is the most important for anyone, considering that there's a collision there of the Christian mind with the secular mind. He says that's completely different. So that's why he's starting with this first. He said, let's sum up, he says at this point, some of the crucial differences of the Christian mind. Well, Christian mind realizes something goes on after you die. To believe that men will be called to account for their wrongs. Yeah. So he says, what price are we paying for this easy coexistence of the Christian with a secular mind? He says the assumption in our world is that it's all over when you die. 60 or 70 years, you're taken care of by the welfare state, or you've made some money, then you sign off for good. The whole point was to eat well and grow and learn and make some money, and that's the sum of things. He says, of course, the Christian says there's a spiritual war that's tearing at the heart of the universe, and that we're trying to mold a soul for God, which is on its way to eternity. So he says, do we as Christians mentally inhabit the world presented to us by the faith of the church as the real world? Do we mentally inhabit a world with a heaven above it and hell beneath it? A world in which man is called to live daily, hourly in contact with the God whom neither time nor space can limit? Yeah, those some tough questions, aren't they? Do we really daily live thinking about a supernatural world? He says, our personality may bear the imprint of our attempts to live a spiritual life. Our moral conduct might be, conducted because of the Christian code. But he says we fail to introduce anything to the secular world that shows that there's a supernatural orientation. He says the church has neglected the intellectual element in a modern life. He said that may be a very costly one. He said not just professional intellectuals, but just the mental activity of all men as a background for their practical decisions and activities. Oh, I think that is so true. The Christian mind is anti-intellectual these days. And so we have prayer, which is great, and we have churches that have beautiful music and things like that. But where are the Christian thinkers that people respond to? So he said that's we've lost that. The church does not push that. He says the mind of modern man is neglected and forgotten these days. So here we go. That's why, for me at least, apologetics is so important. We need people to think. We need people to be able to articulate the Christian message. And how many times do we see that happen, that somebody can actually explain why they're Christians? I remember J. Warner Wallace. He's was a cold case detective. And he said he used to talk to people when he was an atheist. He'd talk to Christians and ask them some questions. He said he's always amazed how little they understood and how rare it was for them to have any answers for his questions. Yeah, so he says, wherever men gather, we're going to have to raise the banner of Christianity there, which I think is absolutely true. He said he thinks the dominant evil of our time may not be nuclear warfare or the mechanization of society, but a disintegration of human thought and experience into separate, unrelated compartments. That's really sad, isn't it? I think he's onto something there. He said death. Let's take another area. Death. If you're a Christian and you have eternal perspective, that makes such a difference. We've lost some good friends during COVID and after, and because they were Christians, you mourn in a very different way. But he said that's not the only thing. I mean, just the supernatural orientation should show up in ways that we talk about war or capital punishment or euthanasia or suicide. He said medical practice, things like dealing with suffering and failure and destruction, because that knocks everything apart, doesn't it, in the human life, if earthly life, if that's all you have. Now what? I've always thought it'd be good to talk to somebody who has no interest in Christianity and just say, well, that's good if everything's going well for you now, but if trouble comes, let's talk. And, of course, that's a safe bet, isn't it? Because we're all going to have trouble. But some people say, well, who needs Christianity? Everything's fine. Well, it's not going to always be fine. There will be suffering and failure and destruction coming into our lives. He says also, the Christian mind, he says, earthly well-being is not everything. We have to think about something bigger. Success and prosperity is not our final criterion. That's not our total aim. Just be happy. I remember J.P. Moreland saying that he had talked to some parents, and he said over and over again, he said, what do you want for your kids? And they would say for them to be happy. They would never say for them to be well-adjusted or for them to make the most of their gifts. It was always want to be happy. So he says, there's nothing in our experience which won't look different to the Christian mind than to the secular mind. And he gives a list, another list here. War, crime, delinquency, disease, divorce, insanity, vice. He said, what do we do with these things? Well, it's a very different question that a Christian is going to deal with than a secular person. And I think he's right, exactly right. So he points out at the end of the chapter, the dominant concern for his book is that there's no living Christian dialogue on most of the topics that he just mentioned. So he said, we're not carrying Christian thinking into secular dialogues in these areas. He says there's no real general awareness anymore in our society that there's a Christian perspective, a very different perspective. So he said, when the Christian speaks on things like war or delinquency, says the audience doesn't get stirred up. They don't think they're not going to hear anything like that. He said, we become afraid of our own convictions. And he said, yeah, that's true. Things have gotten pretty bad, but we've backed off and allowed the secularists to take over and been afraid to bring up anything, which I think is sad but true. The good news, and that's what I love about apologetics, the good news that when it comes to things like suffering and the problems that we face in this world, Christianity is well equipped to give good answers. And it gives good answers for what makes human flourishing. I think about J. Warner Wallace, again, boy, do I like his material. He has a book called The Truth and True Crime. And he goes through, I don't know, I think it was 13 or 14 characteristics of human flourishing. What do people require to be the best they can be? And he shows how each one of those lines up very well with the Bible, and especially with Christianity. So we have the answers. We just have to have the faith. We have to have the confidence to be able to share that with other people. So I'll leave you with that, just that Christianity provides the best way to live. It anticipates evil, and it tells how to deal with evil, how to deal with pain and suffering and things like that. But we've got to, the challenge is for us to have a Christian mind, which means we need to fill our Christian mind with a lot of good books. So I hope some of the books that we've been talking about here that you would find interesting, that you might put on your shelf and use them as you're interacting with your friends. Well, thank you very much for being part of the podcast, and take care, and let's do another one soon.